My son was barely cold in the ground when his wife handed me a trash bag and pointed to the door. Standing in the rain outside the home I helped buy, clutching my last $30. I believed her promise to leave me destitute. She thought she had won everything. But she did not know about the phone call I just received from a lawyer, or the legal trap my son had set for her from beyond the grave. My name is Margaret Doyle, and I am 62 years old, though my knees often insist I am 80. I stood in the kitchen of the split-level house in Raventon, Oregon, pressing the button on the coffee maker. The machine hissed, spitting steam into the glass pot. I remembered installing these cabinets with my son, Ryan. He had held the heavy drill, his brow furrowed in concentration, while I supported the weight of the oak with aching arms, steadying it until the screws bit deep. Now, standing on the same laminate floor, I felt like a ghost haunting the very room I helped build. The television in the living room was tuned to the 5 o'clock news. The anchor spoke in a grave tone about soaring interest rates and how retirees were re-entering the workforce just to afford groceries. I opened my worn leather wallet, shielding it from view out of habit. $42. That was what remained of my discretionary spending for the month, moving in with Ryan and his wife. Ava was supposed to be a sensible financial decision. We would pool resources. I would help with the house. It was a lie we all told ourselves to make the transition easier. My lower back throbbed, a permanent souvenir from 30 years of changing bedpans and lifting heavy patients at Everbright Senior Care. I had scrubbed floors and swallowed my pride more times than I could count, all to ensure Ryan never had to struggle the way I did. And he hadn't. Ryan was a good man, a manager at Northbridge Systems. He was gentle, perhaps too gentle. He sat in the living room now, staring at his phone, exhausted. This house, with its manicured lawn and fresh paint, legally belonged to him and Ava. But the down payment that had come from the life insurance payout when my husband died and the sale of my own small cottage. Then there was Ava. She swept into the kitchen, the scent of expensive vanilla perfume trailing behind her. She worked in marketing for Pure Nest Living, selling an image of domestic perfection that she tried desperately to replicate within these walls. To the outside world, she was the ideal wife and mother. Her social media feed was a curated gallery of smiling faces and staged family outings. But when the camera was off, and her eyes landed on me, the warmth evaporated instantly. "Dinner is in 10 minutes, Ava announced, not looking at me, but at the reflection in the oven door to check her lipstick. We sat around the dining table, a piece of furniture that cost more than my first car. The meal was a synchronized performance. Ava discussed her new branding project for a line of eco-friendly detergents. Ryan muttered about deadlines and server migrations. My 2 teenage grandchildren shoveled food into their mouths, eager to escape back to the digital glow of their bedrooms. I sat at the edge of the table, nursing a glass of water, practically invisible. "Pass the salt, please," I said softly. Ryan handed it to me with a tired smile. "How was your day, Mom?" before I could answer. Ava cut in. "Ryan, did you see the engagement on the post I tagged you in? We need to keep up the algorithm." I swallowed my words, along with the dry chicken. It had been like this for months. Small erasures of my existence. Last week, I found labels inside the pantry. One shelf was marked "Family Snacks" in elegant calligraphy. The bottom shelf, near the floor, had a piece of masking tape that simply read, "Margaret." And yesterday, I found the framed photo of my late husband, Frank. face down in a drawer. When I asked, Ava had sighed, claiming the frame's rustic wood clashed with her modern farmhouse aesthetic. As I cleared the table later that evening, the house fell into a heavy silence. Ryan had gone upstairs to shower. I was wiping down the granite countertops when I felt a presence behind me. Ava was leaning against the doorframe, a glass of red wine in her hand. She watched me scrub a stain, her expression unreadable. "You know," she began, her voice light, almost conversational. "Ryan works so hard. It worries me sometimes. All that stress is bad for the heart." I stopped scrubbing but didn't turn around. "He is strong. He takes after his father." "I suppose," Ava said, taking a slow sip of wine. She paused, the silence stretching thin and taut. "But it makes you think about the future, practicalities." I turned then, clutching the damp rag. "What do you mean?" Ava smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was a sharp, flat expression. "I'm just being realistic. If something were to happen to Ryan, well, this arrangement of ours would have to be restructured. You understand that, right, Margaret?" A cold chill ran down my spine, sharper than the Oregon winter wind. I looked at her, trying to find a trace of the woman my son loved, but all I saw was calculation. "Ryan is fine," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "Of course," she replied, pushing off the doorframe. "Just making sure we are on the same page." She walked away, leaving me alone in the kitchen I helped pay for, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the sudden, terrifying pounding of my own heart. The landline rang at 11:42 at night. It was a shrill, mechanical scream that sliced through the quiet house. I knew, with the terrible instinct of a mother, that life as I knew it had ended before I even picked up the receiver. The voice on the other end was professional and detached. It was a nurse from Raventon General calling to tell me that my son had been in a collision on the interstate. I dropped the phone. I scrambled to get dressed, my hands shaking so violently I could barely button my cardigan. In my panic, I shoved my left foot into a right sneaker and ran out the door, leaving the front door unlocked. The hospital hallway was a tunnel of aggressive white light and the smell of floor wax. I sat on a hard plastic chair, shivering despite the heat being on. Ava arrived 20 minutes later. She was still wearing her work clothes, a sharp navy blazer and heels that clicked loudly against the linoleum. She smelled of stale office air and that expensive vanilla perfume. Her face was pale, but her eyes were dry. "Where is the intake nurse?" Ava asked the receptionist, her voice clipped. "I need to know if they have his insurance information on file. The policy number is in my phone." She did not ask if he was conscious. She did not ask if he was in pain. A doctor with tired eyes approached us. He looked at me, then at Ava, and took a breath that he must have taken 1,000 times before. He told us that the trauma to the chest was too severe. Ryan was gone. The world tilted. I slumped forward, my forehead hitting the cold metal armrest of the chair. In that blinding moment of agony, I did not see the 35-year-old man lying on a gurney. I saw my Ryan at 4 years old, running toward me in the park, with a face sticky from a red lollipop, shouting for me to look at a beetle he found. I felt the phantom weight of his small, warm body in my arms. "No," I whispered into the plastic chair. "Please, no." Then I heard a wail. It was loud, theatrical, and piercing. Ava had thrown her hands over her face. A nurse rushed over to comfort her, and I watched through my blurred vision as Ava leaned into the stranger's embrace. It was strange, but I noticed her sobbing intensified the moment the doctor mentioned the words next of kin and life insurance beneficiary. I don't know how I will manage everything alone. Ava sobbed to the nurse. We have a mortgage. The funeral took place 3 days later under a grey, leaking sky. It was a standard service at the biggest funeral home in town. The room was freezing. Rows of folding chairs were filled with Ryan's colleagues from Northbridge Systems and people I barely recognized. They shook my hand with limp, damp grips and murmured empty phrases. He is in a better place. At least he didn't suffer. I wanted to scream at them that the only place he should be was in his kitchen, complaining about the leaky faucet. But I stood silent, pushed to the periphery. Ava stood at the center of the room, near the casket, accepting condolences like a queen holding court. She wore a black dress that fit her perfectly, looking tragic and beautiful. We are going with the Platinum Service Package, Ava had told the funeral director earlier, her voice firm. Ryan deserves the best. Money is not an issue. I knew Ryan would have hated the satin-lined casket and the exorbitant flower arrangements that cost more than my monthly Social Security check. But I said nothing, assuming she was grieving in her own way. I did not know then that she was already spending the insurance money I had no access to. When it was over, I asked to bring the urn back to the house, just to keep it on the mantel for a few days before the interment. I wanted him near me. Absolutely not, Ava snapped, her mask slipping for a second in the limousine. It stays in the niche at the cemetery. That is dignified. Having ashes in the living room is morbid. Margaret, this is my house, and I need to move forward. That night, the house was full of noise. Ava had invited friends over for what she called a celebration of life, but it sounded more like a cocktail party. Glasses clinked. Laughter erupted from the kitchen, my kitchen. I lay curled up on the sofa in the living room. I could not go to my bedroom because it didn't exist anymore. 2 days after Ryan died, Ava had hired movers to clear out the guest room where I slept, claiming she needed a home office to handle the estate paperwork. My clothes were in a pile in the corner of the den. It will be easier this way, she had said, lying in the dark, listening to the muffled party in the next room. I pulled the thin Afghan blanket up to my chin. I was cold, not from the temperature, but from a hollow ache in my chest. I closed my eyes, but sleep was a stranger. All I could hear was Ava's voice drifting from the kitchen, high and clear. It's going to be a lot of work, settling things. But honestly, the payout helps. I stared at the ceiling, waiting for the last of the guests to leave, wondering when the grief would kill me, or if the coldness in this house would get me first. The shift in the atmosphere was not gradual. It was sudden and sharp, like a door slamming shut in a draft. 2 weeks after the funeral. Ava stopped calling me Mom. We were standing in the hallway, and she looked right through me, her face composed and blank. Margaret, could you move your things? I need to get by, she said. The name hung in the air, foreign and cold. When I asked her about it later, she didn't even look up from her tablet. It is just cleaner this way, less confused. We need to establish clear boundaries now that Ryan is gone. Those boundaries quickly turned into physical displacement. The very next day. I came home from a walk to find my heavy oak dresser sitting in the damp garage. My clothes had been moved to the small bonus room on the ground floor, right next to the noisy furnace and the back door. It was a space intended for storage, drafty and cramped. The master suite is for the homeowner, Ava explained, leaning against the doorframe with her arms crossed. And the guest room upstairs is being converted into my home office. I need space to focus if I am going to support this family. This room is perfectly adequate for a guest. That evening, the humiliation moved to the dining table. Before I could take a bite of the pasta, Ava placed a spreadsheet next to my plate. It was a breakdown of the household expenses, electricity, water, internet, and groceries. Inflation is up to 7% this year, Ava stated, tapping the paper with a manicured nail. I have calculated your share based on square footage and consumption. I expect a contribution from your pension on the 1st of every month. It is only fair. I stared at the numbers. The sum she was asking for would take more than half of my monthly check. But, Ava, I gave Ryan $50,000 for the down payment on this house. We agreed that was my contribution for my old age. Ava took a sip of her sparkling water, her eyes devoid of empathy. That was a gift, Margaret. You signed a gift letter for the bank, legally. It was an unconditional transfer of assets. You cannot retroactively decide it was a loan just because you are struggling. I felt a lump rise in my throat, choking me. I am not struggling. I am family. Family pays their way. She shot back. Then came the rules. They were posted on the refrigerator the next morning. No television in common areas after 8 in the evening. No cooking foods with strong odours, curry, fish, garlic. Laundry machine usage limited to Tuesdays and Thursdays between 10 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. I became a prisoner in the house I helped purchase. I tiptoed around, terrified of making a sound. One afternoon, I left a half-empty coffee mug on the side table while I went to the bathroom. My phone buzzed 10 minutes later. It was a notification from the family group chat. Ava had posted a photo of the mug with the caption, "Look at this mess." It is exhausting when no one takes responsibility for their clutter. I looked at my grandchildren, sitting on the couch with their phones. They saw the message. They didn't look at me. They just shifted their bodies away, as if my presence was contagious. I heard Ava whispering to them earlier in the kitchen, her voice low and conspiratorial. Grandma is having a hard time. She is just a heavy load for us right now, so try not to upset her. She was turning them against me, painting me as a senile burden before I had even lost a step. The breaking point of my silence came a week later. I was folding my laundry in my cramped room when Ava appeared in the doorway. She didn't knock. She never knocked anymore. "I will be frank with you. Margaret," she said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "This arrangement, it is temporary. I am young. I have a life to live." I clutched a towel to my chest, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I do not intend to let anyone old and needy, anchor me down. I am not going to get stuck taking care of you. You need to start making other plans." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the cold draft of the utility room. I sank onto the narrow twin bed, my hands trembling. I thought of the 30 years I spent working night shifts at Everbright, lifting men twice my size, cleaning vomit and blood, ruining my back so I could pay for Ryan's college tuition. I had been strong. I had been useful. How? I whispered to the empty room, tears finally spilling over. How did I become this? I was not a person to her. I was a line item on a spreadsheet, a stain on her perfect floor, a liability to be liquidated. And the terrifying part was, she held all the cards, or so I thought. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of grey, weeping day that makes your bones ache. I had taken the number 12 bus across town to see Dr. Evans about my knees, because Ava said her schedule was too packed to drive me. The ride took 45 minutes each way, and the damp air had settled deep into my joints. When I finally trudged up the wet driveway, shivering in my thin raincoat, I saw it. My suitcase. It was sitting on the front porch, the leather dark and spotted with rain. I opened the door, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Ava was sitting at the dining table, a fortress of documents spread out before her. She did not look up when I entered. She just tapped a pen against a stack of papers. "Sit down, Margaret," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Why is my suitcase outside?" I asked, gripping the back of a chair to keep from falling. Ava finally looked at me. Her eyes were hard, like flint. "Because effective next month, this household can no longer sustain a member who does not generate significant income. I have run the numbers. You are a deficit. But this is my home." I stammered, the water dripping from my coat onto the floor. "Ryan and I, not on paper," she shot back, cutting me off. "And not in reality. Not anymore." She pushed a piece of paper toward me. "I am offering you a choice. A gentleman's agreement, if you will. You can leave today. Find your own arrangement, and keep your little pension check." She leaned forward, and the mask of the grieving widow dropped completely to reveal something predatory. "Or," she continued, "I will file a petition with the court for legal guardianship. I have already spoken to a financial advisor and a lawyer friend of the family. We will argue that your grief has rendered you incompetent, that you are senile. And once I have power of attorney, Margaret, I will control every cent of that pension. I will put you in the cheapest state facility I can find, and you will never see a dime again." The room spun. I felt bile rise in my throat. You can't do that." "Try me," Ava whispered. "I promise you. Margaret, if you make this difficult, if you try to fight me, you will not just lose the house. You will lose everything. I will leave you penniless. I will make sure you have nothing left to claw onto." She slid a handwritten note across the polished wood. "Sign this. It states you are leaving voluntarily due to personal preference. Sign it. Or I call the police right now and tell them you are trespassing and becoming violent." My hand shook so hard I could barely hold the pen. I signed my name, the ink looking like the scratchings of a terrified child. "Good," Ava said, snatching the paper back and tucking it into a folder. "You have 20 minutes to collect any personal effects. The taxi is already ordered." I scrambled to my small room, panic seizing my chest. I grabbed a few sweaters, my medication, and the framed photo of Frank and Ryan from the bedside table. On the top shelf of the closet, tucked behind some old blankets, was a small, dusty wooden box containing old tax returns and papers I bad not looked at in years. I grabbed it on instinct, shoving it into my tote bag without checking the contents. I dragged my suitcase through the hallway, the wheels rumbling loudly on the hardwood. At the front door, I paused. I looked up at the wall where my wedding photo had hung for 20 years. It was gone. In its place hung a bleak, abstract canvas of black and grey swirls. It was as if I had never existed. Ava didn't even look up from her laptop as I opened the door and stepped out into the rain. 2 hours later, I sat on a plastic chair in a motel room just off the interstate. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner. I opened my wallet and dumped the contents onto the scarred laminate table. 3 $20 bills, a 5, and some loose quarters. I counted it 3 times, praying the number would change. $65.40. Outside, the roar of 18-wheelers shook the thin window pane. I stared at the money, the pitiful sum of a lifetime of hard work, and I could hear Ava's voice echoing in the empty room, louder than the traffic. "You will be penniless, Margaret." I closed my eyes, and for the first time that day, I let the terror wash over me completely. The room at the Starflight Motel cost $280 a week. It was located on a stretch of highway dominated by gas stations and weeds, far from the manicured lawns of my old neighborhood. The carpet was a suspicious shade of brown, sticky under my shoes, and the air smelled of industrial bleach, failing to mask years of stale cigarette smoke. I spent my days sitting on the sagging mattress, listening to the hum of the vending machine outside my door. Survival became a game of mathematics. I had to choose between my blood pressure medication and food. So I cut the pills in half with a plastic knife. I bought dented cans of soup and stale bread from the discount bin at the 24-hour grocery store down the road. I stood in line with other invisible people, clutching coupons for 50 cents off, feeling the eyes of the cashier on my grey hair and worn coat. "That coupon expired yesterday, ma'am," the cashier said, popping her gum. "Please, surely you can still accept it," I asked, my voice thin. "Computer says no," she replied, not looking up. I walked back to the motel in the rain, eating the bread dry because I didn't have a toaster. I tried to reach out. I used the prepaid phone I bought to call my old friends from Everbright Senior Care. I dialed Brenda, who I had worked with for 15 years. "Margaret?" Brenda's voice sounded distant. "Oh, I heard about Ryan. That is terrible. Listen, I am in Florida now with my daughter. It is hard to talk right now." "I just needed to hear a friendly voice," I said, gripping the phone. "I know, but I can't really get involved in family disputes," she said, her tone shifting. "Ava posted something about you being unstable. I don't want trouble." She hung up. The isolation was absolute. One evening, I sat in the corner of a greasy spoon diner, nursing a cup of black coffee because it was the cheapest thing on the menu. 2 men in work boots were sitting in the booth behind me. "My uncle lost the farm that way," one man said, his voice low and angry. "This lawyer got the court to declare him incompetent, called it financial guardianship. They took his checkbook, sold his tractor, said it was for his own good. It is legal robbery." I froze. The coffee turned to ice in my stomach. It was exactly what Ava had threatened. Guardianship. Incompetent. It wasn't just a threat. It was a playbook. Back in my room, under the flickering fluorescent light, I finally pulled out the small wooden box I had rescued from the closet. I had carried it like a shield, but I hadn't looked inside. I opened the lid. It smelled of cedar and old paper. There were tax returns from 1998, a receipt for a lawnmower, and a letter from a lawyer regarding my husband's small estate. And there, at the bottom, was a white envelope. It was sealed. On the front, in Ryan's distinct, blocky handwriting, were the words, For Mom. If something happens to Ryan. My breath hitched. I dropped the envelope on the bed as if it had burned me. Why would he write this? Had he known he was going to die? Or had he known something else? I paced the small room, the walls closing in on me. I was terrified of what was inside. If it was a goodbye letter, it would break me. If it was nothing important, I would be left with no hope. I put the envelope back in the box and shoved it under the bed. I didn't sleep that night. I just stared at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a weeping eye. The next morning, the motel manager, a man with grease under his fingernails, banged on my door. "Rent is due," he barked, "and the rate is going up. $350 a week starting tomorrow. $350. I gasped, holding the doorframe. "But I barely have enough for this week. Market rates, lady." He shrugged. "Pay up or get out by noon tomorrow." I closed the door and sat on the floor. I counted my money again. I had $212 left. I was going to be on the street in 24 hours. The panic rose in my chest, hot and suffocating. Ava's voice replayed in my head. "You will be penniless." She was right. I was nothing. I was an old woman in a dirty motel room with nowhere to go. For a moment, a dark, seductive thought crossed my mind. If I took all the remaining blood pressure pills at once, the noise in my head would stop. I wouldn't have to worry about the rent. I wouldn't have to see the look of triumph on Ava's face. Then, I looked at the wooden box under the bed. "No," I said aloud, my voice raspy. "Not like this." I reached under the bed and pulled the box out again. My hands were trembling, but my mind was suddenly clear. If Ryan had taken the time to write this, to hide it, then he had something to say. And if I was going to lose everything, if I was truly going to be the white trash Ava thought I was, then I had nothing left to lose by opening it. If this is the last thing my son wanted to tell me, I whispered, tearing the edge of the envelope, then I am not allowed to die before I read it. My hands were trembling so badly that it took me 3 tries to slide a finger under the flap of the envelope. The paper tore with a sharp sound that seemed too loud in the quiet motel room. I upended it, and 2 things fell onto the stained bedspread, a folded letter on yellow legal pad paper and a thick, cream-coloured business card. Harborline Legal Group. The card read in raised black ink, "Caleb Torres, Senior Partner." I picked up the letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Ryan's blocky, slightly slanted script, the same penmanship I had seen on Mother's Day cards for 30 years. My eyes blurred, but I wiped them fiercely with my sleeve. I needed to see. "Mum?" The letter began. "If you are reading this, then something has happened to me, and I wasn't able to fix things myself. I am so sorry." I sat on the edge of the mattress, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. "You probably think things with Ava and me were perfect," Ryan wrote, "but we have been fighting for months. It is about money. It is always about money. She has been pushing me to refinance the house and put the deed solely in her name. She keeps saying that your contribution was a gift and that we need to cut financial ties with you to protect our assets. She calls it estate planning. But Mom, it feels like greed." I refused. "But she is relentless." I gasped, covering my mouth. All those dinners where I sat in silence, feeling the tension radiating off them, I had thought it was work stress. I had no idea he was fighting for me. I have been driving a lot for work lately. The letter continued. Late nights on the coast highway? It got me thinking. If I crash, if I don't come home, what happens to you? Ava made it clear she doesn't want you there long term. So, last month, I went to see a lawyer named Caleb Torres. I didn't tell Ava. I couldn't. I flipped the page, my fingers leaving faint indentations on the paper. I signed a new will and created a living trust. It is called the Margaret Trust. I have directed 70% of my life insurance policy and 50% of the equity in the house into this trust. But here is the important part. The trust grants Ava the right to live in the house only, and I mean only if she provides you with a safe, rent-free place to live within that same property for the rest of your life. I stopped breathing. I reached for the other papers in the envelope. There was a photocopy of a legal document, stamped and notarized. I scanned the dense paragraphs until I found the section highlighted in yellow marker. Clause 4.2, Conditional Life Estate. The beneficiary Ava Doyle shall retain the right to occupy the primary residence solely on the condition that the grantor's mother, Margaret Doyle, is not evicted, harassed, or coerced into vacating the premises. Any proven act of financial abuse or displacement against Margaret Doyle shall immediately terminate Ava Doyle's interest in the property, reverting full control of the asset to the trustee for the sole benefit of Margaret Doyle. The room stopped spinning. The walls of the cheap motel seemed to expand. Oh, Ryan, I whispered, clutching the paper to my chest. You knew. You knew she would do this. The tears that finally fell were not from grief, but from a sudden, fierce vindication. Ava's threats about guardianship, her confident swagger about leaving me penniless, it was all a lie. Or rather, it was a desperate gamble. She must not have known about this will. Or maybe she suspected it and was trying to scare me into disappearing before I found out. If I had walked away, if I had disappeared into the cracks of the system like she wanted, she would have kept everything. But I hadn't disappeared. The fear that had been paralyzing me for 48 hours began to curdle into something else. It hardened into a cold, heavy stone in my gut. Anger. She had kicked me out into the rain. She had threatened to lock me away in a state facility. She had tried to erase me. And all the while, she was living in a house that she had legally forfeited the moment she put my suitcase on the porch. I looked at the business card again. At the bottom, in small print, it said, specializing in elder law and financial abuse litigation. I looked at the clock. It was 4 p.m. My hands were still shaking, but this time it was from adrenaline. I picked up my prepaid phone and dialed the number on the card. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Harborline Legal Group. A deep, calm voice answered. This is Caleb Torres. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to work. Mr. Torres. My name is Margaret Doyle. I found an envelope from my son, Ryan. There was a pause on the other end of the line. A silence that felt heavy with anticipation. Mrs. Doyle, the lawyer said, and I could hear the shift in his tone, a sudden focus that cut through the static. If you are calling because of the letter Ryan left, then do not hang up. We have been waiting for this call for a very long time. The Harborline Legal Group was not located in a glass skyscraper downtown, but in a refurbished brick house on a quiet street lined with oak trees. A small brass plaque near the door read, Justice for All Ages. When I walked inside, the air was warm and smelled of old books and brewing coffee. The receptionist, a young woman with a kind smile, didn't look at my worn coat or my suitcase. She simply offered me a seat in a velvet armchair and brought me a cup of tea in a real ceramic mug. For the first time in months, I felt like a human being rather than a nuisance. Caleb Torres came out to greet me personally. He was a tall man in his 40s with greying temples and eyes that held a steady, reassuring weight. He shook my hand firmly. "Mrs. Doyle," he said, guiding me into his office. "I am relieved you made the call." His office was cluttered but cozy, the walls lined with framed degrees and photos of his own family. I sat down, clutching my purse. "Ryan came to see me 3 times in the last 6 months of his life," Caleb began, leaning forward on his desk. "He was deeply concerned. He told me that Ava had become ambitious. He feared that if he wasn't there to mediate, she would try to push you out." I nodded slowly, the confirmation settling heavily in my chest. "She did more than push, Mr. Torres. She threw me out into the rain." Caleb's jaw tightened. He opened a file folder on his desk. "I have reviewed the documents you brought, and I pulled the filed copies from the county court. Everything is in order. The Margaret Trust is active. Ryan set it up specifically to prevent this scenario. The deed to the house is held by the trust, not by Ava personally. Her right to live there is conditional." He tapped a specific paragraph on the document. Clause 4.2. It states that if the beneficiary commits any act of financial abuse or fails to provide a safe, permanent residence for the grantor's mother, her life estate is revoked immediately. The moment she put your suitcase on that porch, she violated the terms of the trust. "She made me sign a paper," I said, my voice trembling with shame. "She threatened to have me declared incompetent. She said she would take control of my pension if I didn't leave voluntarily." Caleb's expression turned icy. "That is coercion, Margaret. And under Oregon law, threatening an elder with guardianship to gain asset control is a felony. But we need to prove it. Her word against yours can be messy in court." He pulled a yellow legal pad toward him. "I need you to write a sworn affidavit detailing everything she said and did. I will also subpoena the taxi company for their logs to prove you were forced out." He paused, tapping his pen against his chin. "But Ryan was thorough. He mentioned he installed a smart doorbell camera last year." "Yes," I said. "But Ava changed the Wi-Fi password. She controls the app on her phone. I cannot access it." Caleb smiled, a small, sharp expression of satisfaction. "Ryan knew she might do that. When he set up the account, he added this law firm's secure email as a permanent shared user with administrative privileges. He wanted a backup that she couldn't delete." He opened his laptop and typed rapidly for a moment. I held my breath. "Let's see," Caleb murmured. "Tuesday morning. 10:45? He turned the laptop screen toward me. The video player loaded. The image was crisp and clear, showing the front porch of my house from a high angle. I saw myself standing there, wet and shivering. Then I saw Ava. She was standing in the doorway, her face twisted in a sneer I recognized too well. The audio crackled, but the words were undeniable. "I promise you, Margaret, if you make this difficult, you will not just lose the house, you will lose everything. I will leave you penniless." The video ended. The silence in the office was absolute. I stared at the black screen, feeling a strange mixture of nausea and profound relief. It wasn't in my head. I wasn't the crazy, confused old woman she tried to make me believe I was. There was the proof, stored in the cloud, captured by the son who loved me enough to protect me from the grave. That, Caleb said softly, is the nail in the coffin. That is clear evidence of intent to defraud and abuse. So we call the police? I asked, my hands gripping the armrests. No, Caleb said, closing the laptop. Not yet. If we call the police, she might lawyer up and drag this out. We want her to hang herself completely. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. I will send her a formal letter via courier tomorrow morning. We will invite her to a review of the testamentary documents here at the office. We will frame it as a standard procedure regarding the insurance payout. She will come because she is greedy. She will come alone because she thinks she has won. And when she sits in that chair, we will drop the hammer. I stood up, my legs feeling steadier than they had in weeks. I excused myself to use the restroom before leaving, inside the small bathroom. I gripped the edges of the porcelain sink and looked into the mirror. The face staring back was lined and tired. My hair was grey, and my eyes were red-rimmed. But the fear was gone. The helpless widow who counted pennies in a motel room had vanished. In her place was someone else. Someone who had raised a son who loved her. Someone who had survived decades of hard labour. You are not done yet, I whispered to my reflection. Get ready. Ava. I straightened my coat, splashed cold water on my face, and walked out the door with my head held high. The letter from Harbourline Legal Group was delivered to the house in the suburbs on a Tuesday. Caleb told me he had worded it carefully, titling it, Review of Testamentary Provisions Regarding the Estate of Ryan Doyle. To a guilty mind, it might have looked like a threat, but to a greedy one, it looked like an opportunity. Caleb predicted that Ava would see it as a notification of more assets, perhaps a forgotten investment account or a finalized insurance adjustment. He was right. She did not hire a lawyer. Instead, she called a friend of hers who worked in finance, someone who likely told her that such meetings were standard procedural formalities. She decided to come alone, confident that she could handle an old woman and a small-town attorney, while Ava was calculating her potential windfall. I was moving into a small boarding room that Harbourline had helped me secure through a local charity. It was tiny, just a bed and a hot plate, but the door had a heavy deadbolt, and the landlord was a kind woman who brought me fresh towels. I sat on the edge of the bed, running my hand over the clean sheets. I was beginning to remember what safety felt like. It was not about luxury. It was about the absence of fear. A social worker named Sarah visited me there to help with the paperwork. She was young, with tired eyes, and she listened to my story with a grim expression. You have no idea how rare this is, Margaret, Sarah told me, shaking her head. I see 3 or 4 cases like yours a month. Seniors coerced into signing over deeds. Grandmothers kicked out of annexes they paid to build, but they never have proof. It is always he said, she said, and the law is slow. You have a smoking gun. I have a son who loved me. I corrected her softly. That is the best protection there is, she replied. The days leading up to the meeting were spent in Caleb's office, rehearsing. It felt like preparing for a play where the stakes were my actual life. Caleb would sit across from me, adopting a dismissive tone, trying to trigger me. Why should you stay in the house? Margaret, Caleb asked, his voice dripping with mock arrogance. You do not contribute, You are a drain on the family resources. I gripped my teacup, my knuckles white. Because I paid for it, I snapped, my voice rising. Stop, Caleb said gently, returning to his normal voice. You are getting angry? Anger makes you look unstable? That is what she wants. She wants to paint you as emotional and senile. You need to be a stone. You need to be ice. Let the facts scream for you. We practiced for hours until I could listen to his insults without blinking. The night before the confrontation, I did not sleep. I lay in the narrow bed, staring at the shadows on the wall. My mind drifted back 40 years, to the day I left Kansas with nothing but a suitcase and a bus ticket. I thought of the double shifts at the hospital, the nights I spent rubbing Ryan's back when he had the flu, the sheer physical exhaustion of lifting patients until my spine felt like it was fusing together. I remembered the night Ryan was born, how small and red he was, and how I had whispered a promise to him that he would never know the hunger I had known. You kept your promise to me, Ryan. I whispered to the dark room. Now, I have to stand up for you. The morning of the meeting was bright and crisp. I arrived at the law office 30 minutes early. I sat in the small conference room, a cup of herbal tea steaming in front of me. My hands were trembling beneath the table, so I clasped them together tight to hide the vibration. Caleb sat next to me. He checked the discreet voice recorder on the table, ensuring the red light was steady. She is here, the receptionist messaged Caleb. Through the blinds. I saw Ava's white SUV pull into the parking lot. She took her time getting out. I watched as she paused to check her reflection in the side mirror, smoothing her hair. She pulled out her phone, snapped a selfie with the law office sign in the background, and typed something rapidly. I found out later she had posted a story to her social media that said, "Meeting with lawyers? Adulting is hard, but someone has to handle the estate." She walked into the building with the stride of a woman who owns the world. When the conference room door opened, she breezed in, bringing a gust of cold air and that overwhelming vanilla perfume. Sorry I'm late. The traffic was... She stopped dead. She saw me sitting at the table. For a second, her mask slipped, her eyes widened, and her mouth opened slightly in genuine shock. She hadn't expected to see the woman she had discarded like trash sitting at the negotiation table. But Ava was a professional at deception. Within a heartbeat, she composed herself, forcing a tight, pitying smile onto her face. "Margaret," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I didn't know you would be here. I hope you are managing. You look tired." I didn't smile back. I just looked at her, my face as still as a frozen lake. "Hello, Ava." She pulled out the chair opposite me and sat down, placing her designer bag on the table. She looked at Caleb, then back at me, dismissing my presence as a minor annoyance. "Well," Ava said, clasping her hands and leaning forward with aggressive confidence, "I assume this won't take long. I know Ryan left me a lot of administrative headaches to sort out. So, we can skip the pleasantries and go straight to the money, can't we?" Caleb did not rise to her bait. He simply opened the leather binder in front of him, the movement slow and deliberate. Ryan did indeed leave many things to resolve, Caleb said, his voice even, which is why, 3 months ago, he executed a new last will and testament, naming this firm as the executor. He was quite specific about the terms regarding his mother. He wanted to ensure her safety and her right to remain in her home for the remainder of her life. Ava let out a short, dismissive laugh. She shook her head, her earrings catching the light. Look, I appreciate the sentiment. I really do. I have always tried to care for Margaret. But you have to understand, her decision to leave last week was her own. She was in a state of, well, she was mentally unstable. I couldn't stop her. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. But I remembered Caleb's advice. Be a stone. I remained silent, staring at a spot on the wall. Caleb lifted a document from the binder and slid it across the table. That is interesting. Ava, because according to the Margaret Trust, which now holds the title to the property, the house was purchased and renovated largely with funds provided by Mrs. Doyle. Therefore, the right of occupancy belongs to her. You are the one living there on a conditional basis. Ava's eyes narrowed. She didn't touch the paper. That is just paperwork. It doesn't reflect reality. I am the one paying the mortgage now. I am the one keeping the lights on. That money she gave Ryan years ago. That was a gift. She has no claim. A gift, Caleb repeated. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He produced another sheet, a bank record with highlighted rows. These are the transfer records from the day of closing. And here are the renovation receipts paid directly from Margaret's savings account. $50,000 for the down payment. Another $20,000 for the remodel. That is not a gift. Ava, that is equity. Ava shifted in her seat, her confidence beginning to fracture. Well, financial pressure makes people do things. We were struggling. Let us talk about pressure. Caleb interrupted. He reached for his laptop and turned the screen so it faced Ava directly. And let us talk about your claim that Margaret left voluntarily. He pressed the spacebar. The video sprang to life. The sound was tinny but unmistakable. It filled the small conference room with a violence that made the air heavy. On the screen. Ava stood on the porch, her face twisted in rage. I promise you, Margaret, if you make this difficult, you will not just lose the house. You will lose everything. I will leave you penniless. The clip ended, but the echo of her cruelty seemed to hang in the room. Ava went pale. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She stared at the frozen image of herself, seeing the monster she had become. I looked down at my hands, resting on my lap. I did not feel triumphant. I felt a deep, weary sadness that my son's wife could hate me this much. But I did not look away. That, Caleb said, his voice hard as iron, is what we call constructive eviction and elder abuse. And under the laws of this state, and specifically Clause 4.2 of the trust Ryan established, any attempt to deprive Margaret of her home immediately terminates your interest in the property. Ava slammed her hand on the table, tears springing to her eyes. You don't understand. She is impossible to live with. I was drowning. I said some things I didn't mean because I was stressed. We are not here to evaluate your stress levels or my client's personality. Caleb cut her off, his tone slicing through her hysteria. We are looking at behavior and evidence. You threatened a 62-year-old woman. You coerced her into homelessness. And you did it while knowing you had no legal right to that house. Ava was trembling now. I can fix it. I can let her come back. We can work something out. It is too late for that, Caleb said. He pulled one final document from the stack, especially since our forensic accountant discovered the withdrawal you made yesterday. Ava froze. The color drained from her face completely. You cashed out a substantial portion of Ryan's life insurance policy, Caleb said, tapping the paper. The policy clearly states that 40% of those funds were to be deposited immediately into the Margaret Trust for her medical care. Instead, you transferred the entire amount to your personal checking account. That is not just a violation of the trust. Ava, that is theft. That is felony fraud. The room was silent. Ava looked small in her expensive blazer. She looked from the papers to me, her eyes pleading, but she found no purchase. Caleb slid a single, crisp agreement across the table toward her. He uncapped a pen and set it down next to the paper with a sharp click. "Here is the situation," Caleb said. "This is a voluntary surrender of occupancy and a repayment agreement. You can sign it, vacate the house within 7 days, and return every cent you stole. If you do that, Margaret is willing to let you walk away without a criminal record." He leaned back, crossing his arms. Or, he continued, "You can refuse. In which case, I will call the district attorney's office in exactly 5 minutes, and we will let a jury decide what leaving her penniless really looks like." Ava almost signed. For a moment in that conference room, the pen hovered over the paper. But that night, she called her friend, the one she referred to as a financial wizard. He convinced her that Caleb was bluffing, that no judge would evict a young widow for a family dispute. So, she tore up the agreement and forced us to go to court. The hearing took place in a small, wood-paneled room at the Raventon County Courthouse. It was not like the dramatic scenes on television. It was quiet, smelling of dust and floor polish. I sat on the plaintiff's side, clutching my husband's old wedding ring in my pocket like a talisman. Ava sat across the aisle, flanked by a lawyer she had hired at the last minute. She looked confident, dressed in a soft grey suit intended to evoke sympathy. Her lawyer began by painting a picture of me that I barely recognized. He described a woman who was emotionally fragile, prone to confusion, and difficult to cohabitate with. He suggested that I had misunderstood the conversation on the porch, that my memory was failing, and that I had left the house in a fit of senile pique. Then, it was Caleb's turn. He did not raise his voice. He simply laid out the pieces of the puzzle, one by one. First came the notarized will, then the trust documents, then the bank statements showing the $50,000 I had transferred for the down payment. "And regarding the claim that Mrs. Doyle is confused," Caleb said, looking at the judge, "we would like to submit Exhibit C." He played the doorbell footage. The judge, a stern, middle-aged man with reading glasses perched on his nose, leaned forward. Ava's voice rang out, sharp and cruel, promising to leave me penniless. The courtroom was silent. I saw my grandson, Michael, sitting in the back row. He had skipped school to be here. His face went pale as he watched his mother scream at his grandmother. Ava took the stand, trying to salvage the narrative. When Caleb asked her about the threat, she dabbed at her dry eyes. "I was just emotional," she stammered. "It was a figure of speech. I was grieving my husband, and Margaret was being difficult. I never meant to actually harm her financial standing." "Is that so?" Caleb asked. He held up a piece of paper. "This is an email you sent to your financial advisor 3 days before you evicted my client. The subject line is, 'The Margaret Problem.' In it, you ask, and I quote, 'How do I get her off the deed and out of the house before she realizes she has rights?'" Ava's face crumbled. The defense of emotional outburst evaporated in the face of calculated malice. The judge cleared his throat. He picked up the trust document and read aloud, his voice resonating in the small room. Clause 4.2 is unambiguous. Any action taken by the beneficiary to deprive Margaret Doyle of safe, permanent housing within the residence shall result in the immediate termination of the beneficiary's life estate. He looked over his glasses at Ava. Mrs. Doyle, you did not just evict your mother-in-law. You evicted yourself. The gavel came down with a sound of finality. The ruling was absolute. The house was now under the sole control of the Margaret Trust. Ava was given 30 days to vacate the premises and was ordered to repay the misappropriated insurance funds in full. Ava dissolved into hysterics. She pulled out her phone, frantically calling her mother, then her lawyer friend, sobbing about how unfair it was. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. I felt no joy in her collapse, only a vast, quiet relief. As I walked toward the exit, Michael stepped out from the back row. He looked at his mother, who was cursing in the hallway, and then at me. "Grandma," he said, his voice cracking. I didn't know. I am so sorry." I looked at this boy who had ignored me at the dinner table for months. "You know now. Michael, go and build a decent life. Do not repeat these mistakes." Harbourline arranged a car to take me back to Reventon. When the driver pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same, yet entirely different. It was no longer a fortress I was barred from. It was mine. I unlocked the front door with the key I had kept hidden in my purse. The air inside was still, holding the scent of Ava's vanilla perfume, but that would fade. I walked into the kitchen. On the refrigerator, the laminated list of rules was still taped up, along with the label that said, "Family Area." I peeled it off. It made a ripping sound as it came away. I crumpled it into a ball and dropped it into the trash can. I poured myself a glass of water from the tap and stood in the center of the room. I looked around at the cabinets I had installed with Ryan, the floor I had scrubbed, the walls that had witnessed my humiliation. No one. I whispered to the empty room, my voice steady and strong. No one will ever leave me penniless again. I took a sip of the water. It tasted cold and clean. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on how this family drama unfolded. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the Grandma's Family Diary channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.